What's going on, everybody? It's Q from RTX Gaming, and I want to talk about the fact that Nvidia has now updated their drivers for their GPUs, and they've actually enabled ray tracing on non-RTX series cards. So ray tracing in some way, shape and form is available on stuff like the GTX 1660, the GTX 1080, the 1080 Ti, the 1070, stuff like that. But before we get further into the video, I kind of have to break it down into two different parts. It's probably going to be a long video. I'm going to try to keep it as tech jargon free, but there will be a little of it in there. So hopefully it makes sense, because with these new drivers and the new features available to older cards, there's a big question of price performance on old cards, price performance on new cards, and well, frankly, a lot of people have been kind of underwhelmed by the RTX series, especially considering the price of it. Now, you can take this from whatever way you want. I will upfront say I usually 99.9% of the time will always recommend an Nvidia card for someone, simply because the price, performance, the features is second to none. AMD basically haven't had a competitive GPU, at least anything outside of the entry level stuff, for, I don't know, 12, 15 years. So, I mean, I will freely admit that with the tech that Nvidia are bringing in, stuff like that on the hardware side of it too, with stuff like the G-Sync modules over the last few years, you can see why I would easily recommend that. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole AMD versus Nvidia thing here. I want to stick on topic with ray tracing, and I suppose you could say the new drivers and what it means. Now, so like I said, I'm going to break this into two different parts of the video. The first one that we're going to talk about is what is ray tracing. Again, I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible, but what is ray tracing and why is it important to know that before we look at the rest of the stuff like price, performance, etc. Now, so first off, what is ray tracing? Well, the very basic way to explain ray tracing is that instead of approximating where a light source is and a physical object is and then the shadow, what ray tracing actually does is, like the name suggests, it actually traces a light ray in a straight line or a mirrored line, whatever it is, from the light source to the physical object, and then directly to the shadow afterwards. So it essentially traces the line from the start point to the middle to the end. The start point being the light source, the middle being the physical object, and the end being whatever it is, the shadow cast or the reflection, whatever. Now, this is technically a technique used in modern era, or, well, it's kind of been used all the time, really, which I'll explain now in a second, but it's mostly done, it can be done for shadows, better shadow quality, better ambient occlusion, which I suppose is technically shadow quality, or even stuff like reflections as well. And obviously ray tracing has got a much bigger name and a bigger focus ever since 2018 when Nvidia launched the RTX series cards. Now, Nvidia did not invent ray tracing in any way, shape or form, because ray tracing has been around for about 20 years, believe it or not. But something that's important to note is that up until now it hasn't been used in games, mainly because from its inception about 20 odd years ago, if not more, all the way up until just recently when the RTX series cards came out, the development cost and the actual workload cost was so astronomically high that it was absolutely 100% unviable and unfeasible to actually do it on the fly. Ray tracing was always just used for things like still images, promotional shots, high quality GIFs, films, things like that. Anything where you didn't have to render it live and be using it live like you would in a game. So for example, you would create a scene in a film that had some ray traced effects or whatever, hit render and come back 2, 3, 4 days later or 24 hours later, whatever it was, and you would have your scene rendered because you didn't need that on the fly. The same with things like promotional shots and still images and whatnot. You could create, using ray tracing, extremely high quality photorealistic images. But these things, because of the sheer amount of computational power required, would take hours if not days to render in advance. Let me give you a perfect example. This will also lead into the rest of the video later on. As recent as mid-2018, there's actually a video around somewhere, or it's actually a GIF I should say. It's a 4-second long, 4K, 60 frames per second GIF. It's a very high quality image and it's created using ray tracing. So let's break it down for a second. 4K, 60 frames per second, and it's 4 seconds long. That's a total of 240 frames. Using a GTX 1080, not a 2080, but just a regular GTX 1080, those 240 frames across the space of 4 seconds took 18 hours to render in advance. So some guy was rendering that image, that GIF, to get a 4-second 4K 60 frames per second GIF, and it took him 18 hours to do using ray tracing on an existing card. And this is where I feel that a lot of people don't appreciate what ray tracing actually does, or not so much what ray tracing actually does, more so what the RTX cards are able to do on the fly. To break it down real quick for you, these are GPUs that can do this 60 times per second in live active gameplay, where you previously had a high-end card that would take almost a day to do 4 seconds of the same thing. And it couldn't be done live on the fly. So the computational workload required for all this, and the way they've specifically developed the hardware and baked it into the hardware with the tensor cores and whatnot with Nvidia's RTX, is absolutely, definitely astounding. Now, I can understand why people at the same time would be a little bit upset about performance, especially because these cards are very expensive. An RTX 2080 Ti, the best card you can get at the moment, is anywhere between 1,300 and 1,500 euro. That's a lot of money just for a GPU. I've bought a bunch of high-end GPUs in my life. Most of them were just under 1,000 euro, one of them just over 1,000 euro, but still nowhere near the price of an RTX 2080 Ti. And despite what it can do when it comes to ray tracing, if you're not using ray tracing, those massive performance gains, or massive technology gains I should say, don't actually translate over to performance gains in non-ray traced software. Now, of course, you will get 10% better FPS, 20, 30, 40%, whatever, but usually you would think, when you look at the hardware and what's actually required to ray trace something, if you're not using it, you probably think, oh, I'm going to double my frame rate here, I'm going to triple my frame rate. And okay, that's not the case, and a lot of people can be kind of upset and put off by that. Especially when you consider that there's very, very few ray trace enabled games at the moment. Very, very quickly off the top of my head, I believe there's only 3 of them out there at the moment. Metro Exodus, Battlefield 5, and Rise of the Tomb Raider. Now, there are a couple of other games that are going to have it patched in later down the line, as well as hopefully more developers and all will adopt it going further. Which brings up another good point. Like most software and most innovation, generally the first gen and the first evolution of it isn't really anything special. It's more so to have it available, have it viable, and make people know that this is available, this is aware, and we can improve this going forward. And it will benefit your games and the consumer and the gamer going forward. Now, let's move on to the second part of the video that I want to talk about, and that is Nvidia with enabling ray tracing on non-RTX GPUs. So let's look at the 10 series, the Pascal series of GPUs. A lot of people have called Nvidia lazy when it came to optimizing RTX for older series GPUs. A lot of people are trying to say that, oh, well, they're doing it to make the cards look really bad so people will actually upgrade them. And honestly, I don't think that's the case. Because like I said earlier on in the video, the computational load designed for ray tracing is enormous. If you don't specifically have hardware designed just to do that perfectly, you get an extremely unoptimized version of it. And that's where Nvidia's latest drivers come in. Since it's enabled ray tracing for older GPUs like Pascal series, GTX 1070, 1070 Ti, 1080, 1080 Ti, a lot of people have been hoping to try these out, maybe ray trace something themselves. Now, these drivers only came out yesterday on the 11th of April, so naturally a lot of people haven't got a proper chance to mess around with it and see the performance, but Nvidia have put out performance metrics such as average frame rates based on GPUs and whatnot, and the results are nowhere near spectacular. We're talking along the lines of playing a very optimized game like, say, Battlefield 5, using a GTX 1080 or 1080 Ti at 1080p medium settings with low to medium quality ray tracing, and you're still hovering around the 60 FPS mark, which is very low for that card. But again, you have to factor in the ray tracing side of it. It doesn't specifically have the hardware designed to utilize ray tracing perfectly. And as such, I believe that everything we've seen and what we will see going forward with more and more and more gamers actually getting out there and trying them on their Pascal 10 series cards, I believe that many people, myself included, will not be using ray tracing on older non-RTX GPUs. The performance and visual fidelity loss is just way too high. Let's look back to the Battlefield example I gave a moment ago, using 1080p medium quality settings with medium to low ray tracing quality. You're hovering around the 60 FPS mark. My computer, using a regular GTX 1080, can play that game completely maxed out at 1440p around 100 frames per second with obviously no ray tracing. So you can see the performance hit is absolutely huge. You're going down to almost half the resolution, you're dropping everything from ultra to medium, and you're almost cutting the frame rate in half. And that's on a highly optimized game. Imagine it on something else. So to fellow Pascal series owners out there, if you've got a 1070, 1070 Ti, 1080, 1080 Ti, whatever it is, honestly, I do not recommend ray tracing for you. You get a much higher quality and better experience overall by leaving ray tracing off. And to me, it's just not worth it, especially when you consider you're going to drop down the quality of your textures, your anti-aliasing, your filtering, your lighting, your shadows, whatever it is, just to get that little bit of lower quality ray tracing. You're essentially downgrading the whole experience just for one thing. Now, of course, as PC gamers, you obviously have the freedom to do so, but I don't think it's worth it. I can commend Nvidia for trying to backport this to older, less capable GPUs in this specific regard. And I do think going forward, we're going to see more and more games adopting ray tracing. Not just Nvidia's specific ones, but there have been instances now where other developers are coming out with their own ray tracing in their own engines. In the latest version of the Cry engine from Crytek, they actually have ray tracing available to both AMD and Nvidia users, because that one is engine bound, not specifically designed as RTX ray tracing, which is kind of the Nvidia one, if you will. And I'm sure someday AMD will have their own version of ray tracing as well, be it their own proprietary version or just a kind of generic ray tracing version. And of course, support for it in other engines natively. So I'll just reiterate it one more time before we leave off on the end of the video. Ray tracing has been around for a long time, but usually in different forms, because it was just completely unviable to do on the fly in live gameplay. The fact that Nvidia have developed a system that can do this on the fly multiple times per second in live action gameplay is nothing short of astounding. This lays groundwork for everyone, not just Nvidia, going forward as a jumping off point on how to develop, what to develop, how to make this better, and where we can go from here. So believe it or not, everyone benefits from this. Even if, like me, you have an older GPU that doesn't properly support this and you won't be using it. And even if the RTX cards are a little bit underwhelming, especially for the price and the performance if you do or do not use RTX, just the fact that they exist and they can do what they can do is a huge leap forward. And as far as Nvidia enabling ray tracing on older GPUs, frankly, I don't think it's worth it at all. It's commendable that they're doing it. It obviously shows that they're optimizing their RTX algorithms and their performance, that they can even enable it on these even in a lower quality fashion at significantly slower speeds. But it all points to progress going forward, no matter if you're a PC user, a console user, an AMD user, or an Nvidia user. So there we have it. Hopefully this video has been informative in some way, shape or form. If it has, let me know your thoughts about the video or anything to do with RTX or any type of ray tracing for that matter in the comments section below. Any questions, feel free to drop them down there too. Hit the appropriate button to let me know I did on the video, and while you're at it, why not head on over and hit the subscribe button and even ring the little notification bell. Granted, getting a notification from YouTube in current year about a new video upload or a live stream or whatever is a whole other story, but hey, at least you can say you tried, am I right? As always, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the rest of the videos in my channel.